Yay! Hello, everyone. Happy Monday or not happy Monday. I don't know what your day is like so far. Okay, let's see here. Let's bring in Yahoo. Oh, okay. I feel like since I updated my app. Oh, here we go. Him. Is it working?
Hello.
Yes. Yay. Okay.
All right, it worked.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm good. I was just like trying to figure out how to invite you because I feel like every time I use Instagram, they update it and then I don't know what I'm doing, but I figured it out. So that's
Figured
great.
it out. Success.
How have you been? I feel like a lot. I mean, since the last time I saw you, you got married. So Mazal Tov.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, pretty crazy, life-changing things going on right now. But the last couple weeks have really focused on everything that's been happening in Nigeria, and also in the country. It's basically no sleep since the wedding, but no complaints.
We can sleep later, I guess. If
Yeah,
this
exactly.
There's always something happening. I mean,
Right.
um okay, I feel like people are joining, so we'll just let them continue to join. But like I think we should just get into it. So, for everyone who's joining us, you probably already know, but if you don't, I'm Amy Albertson. I am a Jewish advocate and educator here on Instagram. Maybe you know me from the Asian Israeli days, maybe you don't. But I wanted to bring my friend Yirmiyahu here because I shared one of your posts last week about the Igbo Jewish community, and I got quite a few messages asking me all kinds of questions, and I was just like, I honestly don't even know enough to answer this question, and we need to ask Yirmiyahu. Like, ask Yirmiyahu, ask Yirmiyahu. So I was like, okay, I think we are just gonna ask Yirmiyahu. And so everyone, this is my friend Yirmiyahu Danzig, who will introduce himself and the work that he does. Go for it.
Well, thank you. That was amazing. So, first of all, I have to say that I didn't know your work until we met at Jews Talk Justice. And since then, I've been seeing everything that you're posting, and it's so amazing. And our, I don't want to say field, like overlaps in so many different ways. This kind of space where we talk about Jewish diversity, about the magnificence of what it means to be Jewish in all the different ways that people can belong to the Jewish people.
Yes.
And I think this right here is like an amazing opportunity to talk about it, to expose some issues that we need to talk about. Some of them are amazing and wonderful and exciting, and some of them are more difficult. So we can have some of these kind of tough talks right now.
Definitely.
Um, so just a little bit about myself. 26. I've been living in Israel for 8 years. On my father's side, we're actually from Israel, Jerusalemites, generations and generations. A lot of people in history and in academia refer to us as Palestinian Jews. Within the Jewish community, we're known as Jews from the Old Yishuv. Um, and my mother's family is actually from the Caribbean. So this community, this very ancient community, that's been basically transported from Spain, from Sephard, through the Spanish Inquisition to the Caribbean and mixed in with the African and Indian population there. So growing up in the States, Jewish diversity was very much my reality. I didn't fit
Mm-hmm.
into any one of these boxes that society wanted to push me into. But it caused me to really have a great appreciation for how dynamic and flexible Judaism is, despite it being one of the, if not the most ancient, consistently existing civilization in human history. And so in Israel today, I basically have a couple hats that I wear. Two of the most important one is educator, because
Mm-hmm.
I have a passion for Jewish history, culture, spirituality, from the ancient period all the way until today. And the second hat is activist, right? Because I think that we have a lot to do in terms of, through education, getting the Jewish world, both in the diaspora and in Israel, to catch up to this reality that is the
Yes.
magnificence of Jewish diversity. So, it's manifests in a few different ways. One of the main things I do is I'm an activist in basically peace initiatives between Israelis and Palestinians, Jews and Arabs, and also confronting racism within Jewish Israeli society and making sure that every Jew, every Israeli gets their equal rights that they deserve under the law and under certainly our Torah.
I love it. I love it. And yeah, I also, you know, it's like we feel guilty to say it, but like, yeah, I didn't know about you until we met at the conference, but obviously that's divine intervention or something where we
Absolutely.
were all brought together in that place. And I am so happy to be in this movement with you and all the things that you're talking about and speaking for. And so many, I feel like, you know, in this exploration of like Jewish diversity, there's just such a huge spectrum of communities and people from all over. And you particularly um, come from, and I feel are knowledgeable about groups that are especially not really known about or talked about. And so, you know, that's very exciting for everyone, you know, that you're out there speaking about it. So we can probably have like 5 million live streams where we talk about like all kinds of different things, and we will talk about them. But in particularly, I wanted to talk to you like so immediately about the Igbo Jewish community. You put up a post if you want to kind of relay what that post said and then give a little background about the community in general. From my understanding, you are doing work um, regarding them and like what the greater Jewish community is doing. So I want to kind of get into that, but maybe just first kind of like what the situation is and like who they are.
Yeah, for sure. Just like a little background about how I kind of came across this in the first place, because I
Yeah.
think it kind of exposes a lot about, the fact that so few people know about this says a lot
Mm-hmm.
about the kind of biases that we have in Israel and just in the diaspora in general about what's going on in the Jewish world outside of our kind of little bubbles.
Yes.
But I've been engaged in, Jewish advocacy work for more than a decade. Whether it was BDS stuff on campus in the United States and then coming to
Mm-hmm.
Israel and then joining the World Zionist Organization and being in the World Zionist Congress. I thought I had met every type of Jew, seen every single type of experience, which was very naive at the time. All of a sudden, I'm confronted by the fact that there is, like on the internet, I see there are innumerable amount of people that are saying they're coming from Nigeria, that they're Jewish, that they have this
Mm-hmm.
ancient identity. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
how is it possible that I don't know about this?
Right.
And it kind of opened up a whole kind of Pandora's box, because then I was like, okay, I got to go to the source and I got to speak to the actual people from that community so they can tell me about their experience. And basically, it's like it wasn't hidden. It was kind of like it was hidden in plain sight, so to speak. That you have this
Right.
entire community with a whole structure, with a whole history, really just feeling and experiencing life that they are Jewish no less than any one of us, yet nobody is talking about them, and
Right.
they're experiencing a very serious problem in Nigeria. And basically, decades this has been going on, and nobody's talking about it. And by this is what the post was about. It was basically me calling out and saying, hey guys, there's like a pogrom going on in Nigeria right now. People are being rounded up, attacked, and even killed because they're Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
And this is in 2021. And not only are we not doing anything about it, most of us don't even know about it.
Yes. Yeah. I have a similar, you know, I understand kind of how you feel like I grew up knowing about mostly Ashkenazi Jews because that's my family. And I also didn't grow up in like a Jewish community, but even people in America who do grow up in very involved or affiliated don't necessarily learn about other types of Jews. And so, yeah, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, there's Black Jews. And they think like just Black American Jews, or they think just Ethiopian Jews. And in Israel is where I started to really learn and be exposed to, I think, more of a global picture. But I would say that you're right. Like most people have no idea at all. Um, okay, so let's go back and maybe you can give us like a little foundational history about the Nigerian Jewish community specifically. So, okay, so a clarification question. We talk about the Igbo Jewish community, and I don't think a lot of people know, and I only know on a very surface level from reading different books that are by Nigerian authors and deal with things like the Biafran War and Civil War and things like this. But so the Igbo is like a tribe in Nigeria, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so, oh, look, someone on here is Igbo and Jewish. That's amazing. So maybe you can explain. I know it's hard to like go through a whole detailed history or whatever. You don't need to do that, but explain to us like why they're called Igbo Jews and not necessarily Nigerian Jews, and also are there other Jews in Nigeria who are not Igbo? Like, kind of the background of this community.
Absolutely. So first thing, it's like we have to unpack a lot of stuff here, right? And so
Right.
some of these things deserve like a more in-depth explanation. So maybe we'll get into some of those things later, because we have a number of biases. Number one,
Mm-hmm.
we have this, as we talked about before, kind of like this Western bias, right? A
Mm-hmm.
lot of things, the discussions about Jewish identity and Jewish history are kind of what we call in America like Ashke normative, right? We talk about things that happen
Mm-hmm.
in the European experience of the diaspora. And so the other things that happen in other places of the world, they're kind of like on the periphery. They're not central to the story. They're important, but they're not as important, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one bias. Another bias is this kind of Judea bias, right? I'm going back ancient history, and that's the reason why we identify, the majority of us in the Jewish world today identify as Jewish, is because we trace our identity, our Israelite experience from
Mm-hmm.
ancient Judea. But
Mm-hmm.
before Judea, there was the kingdom of Israel, and there was
Right.
12 tribes, right? So the majority of us are descended from this Judean tribe of Judah experience, and there was other tribes there
Mm-hmm.
as well. But there was a whole northern kingdom with 10 tribes that, because of similar things that happened to us with the Babylonians and the Romans, were exiled from the land, were exiled from the indigenous homeland of Israel. And
Mm-hmm.
then what happened to them? They kind of get removed from our frame of reference, from the Jewish frame of
Okay.
reference. Now, for a lot of people, that meant, okay, they're never coming back. Just like a lot of people said that the Jews would never come back to the land of Israel, right? But we continue to be a people in the West, mostly in Europe and in the Middle East. So people knew about these Jewish communities. Jews that went to the global South, so to speak, right? So places like Africa, India, the Southeast Asia, these communities are unheard of from the
Mm-hmm.
Western bias.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this led a lot of people to say that, oh, they're myths, right? These tribes, they no longer exist anymore. Maybe they'll come at the end of days, right? People start talking about different apocalyptic theories. But in the realm of actual history, this thing kind of comes to a big slap in the face moment, like, oh, wait, this is not just like a story. This isn't just in the
Mm-hmm.
realm of like belief. This is real. And where did this happen? Basically in two places. In India, in southern India, with the Bene Israel community,
Mm-hmm.
and in Ethiopia with the Beta Israel community. And so all of a sudden you have two communities that basically not long after the founding of the reestablishment of the state of Israel are like, hey, we're Jewish, and we're not just Jewish, we're also descendants of those 10 northern tribes that were lost to you so long ago.
Right.
But
We've been
we've
here this whole time
e-
being
e-
Jewish, just like you,
exactly.
and you just didn't think that we were here.
Exactly, right? So now let's take it to the Nigerian situation, right?
Sure.
So Ethiopia is East Africa, right? And according to the different records that we have coming from the ninth century and even later, there's references to there being other tribes of Israel in the interior of Africa. Where they were exactly, nobody knew. What we do know is that the second somebody was saying, we're going to explore, the Europeans are going to explore the river Niger, that the chief
Mm-hmm.
rabbis of the United Kingdom, the Sephardic and the Ashkenazic chief rabbis, sent letters because they said, oh, you're going to the river Niger, you're going to find some of the lost tribes of Israel there, right? Quote unquote
Okay.
lost. Now, historically speaking, the Igbo people had been there already for 1,000 years, if not more.
Mm-hmm.
And what they were doing, which is described in detail by the first British people to show up on the banks of the River Niger, was copy paste straight from the Torah, right? Their lifestyle, everything they did, they asked them where they're from. They said, "Oh, we come from this place up in the northeast. We come from basically
Hmm.
we come from the land of Israel. Oh, what do? We circumcise our sons on the eighth day. Oh, when it's the fall, we have a new year, and then we have a day of annual atonement." Everything they described to them about their lifestyle was exactly what the Torah was. And the problem is that when the British saw this, it's not like they're like, "Oh, okay, there's some Jews down here. Let's go get the
Right.
chief rabbis from England to come help them and to reunite with them." They're like, "No, we have to convert these people to Christianity as
Right.
soon as possible." And that's what
Right.
they did. They started aggressively missionizing them and forcing them to adopt Christianity. And so now this Igbo tribe, which was identified up until that point 100% with their Hebrew culture, their ancient Hebrew culture, was forced to take on Christian religion and norms and to basically have their culture be systematically erased.
Right.
And this leads us up to the situation where when the British established Nigeria, they basically just took a line and drew it on a map, forcing
Hmm.
all these different tribes and ethnicities together. They said, "Okay, now all of you guys have to live with this Igbo minority." And immediately, because the British were super anti-Semitic towards them, the rest of the Nigerian citizens became super anti-Semitic towards them. And it just set up this situation, which is spiraled until it got to the Biafran War, or as many people call it, the Biafran Genocide, where 1 to 3 million Igbo were killed. And during this period, there was already a movement of people saying, "You know what? If we can't have our own independence, if we can have our own freedom, then the very least we can do is make a return to Judaism, to make a return to Torah." And since it's 51 years since the end of the genocide, and we're seeing a revival of Jewish life amongst the Igbo, right? Not all Igbo, just so people are clear about this,
Hmm.
not all Igbo are practicing Jews, right? You have
Okay.
people that for them, they're just ethnically Jewish, and that's enough, right? They have some of them that are practicing Christians still, right? Because of colonialism. And then
Hmm.
you have some that have taken on full force. You can't say that they're any less observant than anybody else, from in the ultra-Orthodox community. There's the full spectrum there, right? And that's the situation in terms of Jewish identification today.
Okay. And so you mentioned earlier this term, Judea and Jewish, and we are called Jews because we come from the kingdom of Judea. That's where the term came from. So would the Igbo Jews didn't use this term because had already separated and the rest of the world was going on calling these people Jews, right? But they didn't really know about this. Like
They
a
didn't
lot
know
of
about that term, yeah.
communities. Right. Okay. So it's not like the British came in, they were like, "Oh, you're just like the Jews." They're like, "Okay, you're just doing something that's not Christian, and so we're going to change that."
Well, so this is the thing, right? So the Igbo wouldn't have recognized the term Jew, right? Just because
Right.
the term
Right.
Jew to somebody who only speaks Hebrew, they'd be like, you'd have to explain to them what that means, right? Because it's an English
Right.
term. So
Right.
them, when the British showed up and saw what the Igbo were doing, they said explicitly, "Oh, these guys are Jewish." They said that. They wrote
Okay.
it. They wrote it down, right? These guys are Jewish. What they're doing. The Igbo, when they heard that, they're like, "All right, what's Jewish? We're Igbo. This is what we do." By the way, this is something which was the same thing for Jews in India, Jews in actually even the Jewish community in Egypt didn't use the term Jew, right? They used the
Hmm.
term Israelite, and now that community is completely part of the state of Israel. In
Right.
Ethiopia, the term Jew was a curse word, right? The only time you would be using that word is if you were a non-Jew cursing a Jew, right? So they
Right.
preferred the term Israelite. It all
Hmm.
depend on where you were, but today all Igbo know that Jewish and Hebrew and Israelite, these are all the same thing. These are all
Okay.
describing the same kind of civilization, the same ancestry.
Okay, we have a question here from Partisan Princess 2, wanting to know, are all Igbo Jewish and why aren't they counted among the world's Jewish population?
Okay, so we mentioned before, right? This gets into like the question of like what exactly is Jewish, right? So
Right.
we have people in many different communities of the world that would say, "You know what, I'm just ethnically Jewish, or I have like a Jewish grandfather, so I identify as Jewish, but I don't practice," right? And you have people that are halakhically Jewish that are fully practicing, and you have people that are halakhically Jewish that don't practice at all, right? You have the full spectrum. So the Igbo community, right? In their entirety, they identify as Jewish ethnically. In terms of practice, there's a full spectrum, right? Because as I said, the British, unfortunately, were very successful with their missionizing. And there's a
Hmm.
lot of horrible, some people might know of the author Chinua Achebe, and he has a
Yeah.
famous book, Things Will Fall Apart. And so
Hmm.
he wanted to make sure that that book was not just specific to his community's experience. He wanted to speak to the entire experience of colonialism. But Chinua Achebe is talking about Igbo life being colonized by the British. Yeah, a lot of
Sure.
people don't, yes. And so when he's explaining, like if you go back and read the book, you
I
can
have
see he
I
talks
read it
about,
in high school. It was assigned to me in high school, and I went to Catholic high school, so you can imagine like the
oh,
context of
wow.
which we learned things. But that's incredible because yeah, he's the first Nigerian author I've read, and I've since read many others. But I have to reread these things with the context of like the Igbo community are Jews. Like
Exactly.
that's
Yeah. It's
crazy.
a it's an amazing thing to go back and read, because I was lucky in the sense that I read the book when I had already heard about it. I think at that point I hadn't really researched it, but I'd heard about this. And I'm reading the book and I'm like, "Oh, it says that they circumcised his son on the 8th day. Oh, this person committed suicide and they wouldn't bury him in the cemetery with everybody else." It's like all these different things are like, oh my, these are Jewish things that they're doing. And Chinua Achebe, when he was saying things fall apart, he was talking about the Torah life that they were living fell apart, right? And how the British basically by force made them view their own culture, civilization, practice, and religion as being something barbaric. So they're dealing with that in a very real way today.
Hmm.
But things started to pick up in 2015, and this has kind of led us to the point where we're now. And this is the
Okay.
reason why anti-Semitism has gotten so bad in Nigeria, and it's because the Jewish revival in Nigeria has gotten
Okay.
so big.
Okay. And so some people are asking about halakha and things like this. And so that kind of leads to a question I also have, which is in regards to their Jewish acceptance in it sucks because and you and I can have a whole conversation about this, and you know that I have some issues with a lot of these things of like who is a Jew. And one of the most widely kind of one accepted sign of like that you are part of the Jewish people or you're being more widely accepted is things like right of return. So are they able to take advantage of right of return as Jews? Are they, when they get to Israel, are they being do they need to convert? What's kind of happening with this? Because obviously they're experiencing a pogrom in Nigeria and they need to come to Israel. I mean, I think that's for me the logical solution. But yeah, what's going on with that?
So I think we'll come back to the solution later, right? Because
Right. Okay.
there's a lot of dispute about what different solutions could
Sure.
be. We'll come back to that.
Sure.
So to answer the question straight up, can they return to Israel with the law of return? The answer is no. And this kind of gets to the very uncomfortable conversation that we all need to be having right now. And that's like, most people don't know that Ethiopian Jews can't return to Israel through the law of return. Gasp. People are like, how's that possible? Because there's been 2 missions to
Hmm.
airlift Jews from Ethiopia, Operation Moses and Operation Solomon. People know
Yes.
this. But what people often don't know is that there are thousands of Jews in Ethiopia today that are
Right.
on waiting lists to make
Hmm.
Aliyah. They can't just go in on a plane just like somebody else from Canada or America or France or wherever else and come get their citizenship in Israel. They're on lists, and they're being prevented literally from being able to make Aliyah. So the question is why, right? And
Yes.
that's that the Rabbanut, the Rabbinate, the Ministry of Interior, all these different institutions still do not recognize them as 100% Jewish, right? So there's this idea that, okay, yeah, they have Jewish ancestry, they have some type of Jewish connection, but that means that we need to kind of bring them in and they have to go through some official process, right? And by the way, not all of this is because of discrimination or racism. A lot of it is, but not all of it is, right? A lot of it is also just kind of from this point of like, okay, this idea that they're more assimilated than other populations, right? That they're more intermarried than other populations, and we need to take care of the Jewish character of the country, and that's why we are doing this. Obviously, you and I both know that there's so many problematic things with that statement. There's so many different biases there, that are really just, are something that we really need to shudder at. But we got to this point because we are viewing Jewishness from a very specific paradigm, right? When I grew up in the States, people would see me, and I'm sure the same thing happened to you, and then the second they would find out, first of all, obviously they would assume I'm not Jewish, right? But when they would find out, they see gigantic Magenta V, they see a kippah on my head, and like, what is that? You Jewish? And I'm like, yeah, I'm Jewish. And like, the question is always how? How is it
Yes.
possible? And then and the assumption is always, at what point did you change? Right? Okay,
Right.
maybe you didn't change, but maybe your ancestors must have changed. The assumption is that Jewishness comes from one paradigm, right? And anybody else has to be kind of grafted in, as opposed to being equally authentic.
And on top of that, that you must not know about the Jewish people or Judaism or anything as much as someone else, which is something
Right.
that really gets me.
Yeah.
But I digress. Continue.
No, no, I think that's a super salient point, because when I'm going to go back to the Beta Israel example, and then I'm going to bring it
Hmm.
back to the Igbo, right? Because
Yes.
Beta Israel, their tradition, according to their oral history, that we can corroborate with other different, evidences from archaeology and anthropology, is that they came from the Northern Kingdom, right? That they were the tribe of Dan and maybe a few other tribes.
Right.
And as a result, their Judaism is super ancient, right? And it developed in its own unique way, according to its circumstances, in a way that Judaism in Yemen did not, or Judaism in Germany did not, right? Because the rest of that part of the Jewish world, the northern hemisphere of the Jewish world, was, but in various ways, connected to each other. So they were able, to some extent, develop together.
Hmm.
And so the assumption was, when Beta Israel comes back into the scene of Jewish life, comes back to Israel, that, oh, we need to catch them up. Okay, we can talk about that. This need to catch each other up, so to speak, but that's the idea. You have to be catching each other up. If I don't see you,
Right.
Amy, after, I don't know, 20 years, then it's not like, okay, Amy, have a seat. I'm going to teach you everything about what I learned in the past 20 years. No, I'm going to teach you a little bit about what I learned. You're going to teach me what you learned. It has to be equal. But that was not the assumption. So the same thing applies to the Igbo. The Igbo, there are things that they lost because of colonialism, because of violence, because of their isolation, right?
Hmm.
There's also things that we lost, by the way,
Right.
because we also
Yeah.
experienced colonialism and
Yes.
violence. So maybe they have things to teach us as well. And my statement is absolutely 100% we have things to learn from them.
Yes. And this is, I mean, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but, I'm very vocal about the fact that I'm a patrilineal Jew and how, this is the rule and the halakha and all these things. And just like people don't know where that rule comes from. And that's exactly it, is that this rule comes from the isolated experience of literally like oppression and colonialism that Jews went through in order to create this rule to preserve. But other Jewish communities went through different experiences and therefore have different rules regarding specifically that, but all kinds of other things. And I think it's that we need to bring it all together and kind of have a reconvening of, the Talmud developed in these areas with these two kind of battling communities. But what about the rest of global Jewry who were, trying to be Jewish in their own right, in their own places? And wow, this is incredible. Okay, so that was a lot, but I've just learned so much, and I'm just so intrigued. I want to maybe go into a little more detail about what is happening. Like, well, you said that this pogrom or genocide has been going on for actually decades. So, like, obviously the details are not pretty, but like, can we get into maybe a little more of the details? Because I feel like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like not only is the Jewish revival responsible for the increase in violence against the Igbo Jews, but also the situation in Nigeria itself, right? Like, I'm not
Yeah.
really well versed in Nigerian politics at the moment.
Yeah. So okay. Yeah. So yeah, it starts in 1914. So 1914, the British decide that they're going to take basically three separate districts that they ruled in what is present day Nigeria and make it Nigeria.
Okay.
Um, and by doing so, they did not take into consideration whatsoever the tribal, ethnic, religious makeup of the places that they were all uniting.
Right.
And what happened was is that you had a Hausa Fulani, which is the Muslim group in the country, that immediately came to dominate the government structures. And you had a second largest ethnic group, the Yoruba, which was split between Islam and Christianity, but their own kind of very large ethnic group with a very unique and separate history. And they started basically running the affairs of the country. Now, there was a third group, which was smaller than those two, and that was the Igbo. And they immediately had to kind of make their way in this country, and had to do so with the fact that the British had already defined them to other people as these conniving, controlling Jews. And it immediately became this dynamic that whenever an Igbo became successful, it was because of a conspiracy, right? He didn't get it because of his own hard work. He did it because there's some cabal of people controlling
Mm-hmm.
things from above that gave it to him. And when the British then leave in 1960, they leave the Igbo in this situation. And things start happening, all this unrest that are very typical of this post-colonial scenario, not just in Africa, but in Asia and also the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
And that created a situation that in 1966, there was a coup. Now, this coup had a diverse representation among it. And I think it goes without saying who they blamed for the coup, who the people then blamed for the coup. They're like, oh, this is an Igbo coup. That's what everybody said in the country. That's what the news reported. And within a few days, pogroms started erupting all over the country. And within like a few weeks, 30,000 Igbo were murdered. Like, this is insane. And it set off this chain of events that the Igbo then said, you know what? We don't want to be part of Nigeria. If this is what Nigeria means for us, then we're going to declare our own state. And so they all went, the people fled, over 1 million people fled into the area where is the Igbo homeland, called Igbo land, and they declared an independent state. That state was then systematically starved and bombed over a period of, I think it was around 3 years, not only by the Nigerians, but also by the British and the Egyptian army. There's some crazy things, connections here in the history, and between 1 to 3 million people were killed. And this, for them, was experienced as a genocide. I think most people that look at what happened, like, that's a genocide that they experienced. And at the end of the genocide, Nigeria said, okay, you're back part of Nigeria. There was no reconciliation. There was no kind of discussion about anti-Semitism and the role it played in the country. They're like, okay, everybody starts off with basically the same amount of money, a super tiny amount of money. They took everybody's funds. And they said, this is it. Now you're all Nigerians again. And from then until now, it's 51 years. You know, the war started in 67. And today, we've seen something happen, right? So when the Igbo saw, okay, we're not allowed to have political independence. We're not allowed to have some type of autonomy in our region, at least. What we're going to do is we're going to be spiritually autonomous. And right after the war, you basically see this kind of revival of Judaism in Igbo land. The building of synagogues, the growing of these communities, the Jews coming from Israel and from other places of the world to come and meet these people just serendipitously, by chance. Jews
Mm-hmm.
visiting Nigeria and saying, oh, hey, these people are doing what we're doing. They're identifying the same way that we're identifying. Let's have discussion about Jewish identity. And these communities start popping up all over the place. And in 2015, somebody who was, I'm not going to mention names because, it's some of these things,
Sure.
there's some kind of like are touchy issues, political
Sure.
issues. But somebody who was a very important Igbo political figure said, you know what? It's all this stuff doesn't mean anything if I don't reclaim what my identity is, if I don't decolonize my identity. And so he started going out in public with a kippah and with a talit and with a big Magen David, and he was saying, you know what? We're not going to be afraid of who we are. We're going to say it loud and we're going to say it proud. And after he did it, the streets were filled with people doing it, and more synagogues started being built. The problem is that the Nigerian government then drew an association. They said, okay, Judaism equals insurgency. Judaism
Mm-hmm.
equals separatism, right? Which is
Mm-hmm.
totally not true, obviously. We're talking
Right.
about two separate things. But what immediately started happening after that is that not only were people that were associated with this individual persecuted, but also anybody that was seen wearing a kippah, anybody with a Magen David, anybody with a talit, anybody attending a synagogue, right? And this has just been getting worse and worse and worse with the coming years.
Wow, this is just so interesting. So kind of taking back to something that you said and that we talked about. So the greater Jewish community obviously wasn't really talking about the Igbo tribe as like a Jewish tribe or like Jewish people. What about the rest? But the British did identify them as like being like these other Jews they know about. So what about the rest of Nigeria? Because I feel like, and again, I obviously am not as well versed as you. I have not read nearly enough, but I have read like quite a number of books that are by well-known Nigerian authors that are talking about this history and this war, but I do not recall any mention of anyone being Jewish or anti-Semitism or any of these things. So like what is the Nigerian society kind of view of these people, or like what is their understanding or feeling, or I don't know any of that.
So it's such a good question because I remember when I first wanted to like look into this subject, I was like, what does everybody do, right? You go on Google, you start reading a couple articles, you maybe get a book on Nigerian history, and that's what I did. And I'm like, okay, I don't see anything here talking about
No
this,
Jews.
so it must not exist, right? There's a few different problems. Number one is that the British, despite the fact that they wrote about this extensively in their own personal logs and journals, did not really
Mm-hmm.
talk about it publicly. And why they did that, we can speculate. It's hard to know.
Sure.
The second thing is that within Nigeria, not just Nigeria, but lots of African countries, there was this idea after this post-colonial reality that it was like, okay, whatever the British said, told us about ourselves, that's just got to be colonialist thinking, right? They have this
Mm-hmm.
obsession with Jews back in Europe, so they show up in Nigeria, they see somebody that's doing maybe something similar, they're like, oh, you guys are Jews too, right? And
Mm-hmm.
because the British told us that, we're just gonna ignore that. And there is a minority of Igbos today that will say that, right? The British told us this, and so it's not really our identity. We're from Nigeria from time immemorial. Now, the vast majority of Igbos completely reject that for a very
Okay.
clear reason, and that's that they had this identity before the British told them, right? And you
Right.
ask their elders, they will tell you that. And a people doesn't just start doing copy paste what's in the Torah, overnight because a British man said, "Oh, hey, you're a Jew. Start
Right.
acting Jewish." Doesn't
Yeah.
work that way, right? So it's like a reverse kind of Orientalism, a reverse racism, right, where they're saying like, "Oh, the British, said they were Jewish, so then we all started behaving Jewishly." No, that's an absurd claim, and that's why the majority of Igbo reject it. Now, when I started going beyond just what's in the textbooks, now there's like some books that have actually been written on the subject. Back then, when I started looking into this, like almost a decade ago, there was nothing. Now there's actually been academic works written about the Igbo Jewish identity. Not a lot, but they exist now. But when I was trying to look beyond what was just in the textbooks, I was like, you know what? I have some Nigerian friends. I'm just going to talk to them, non-Igbo. And, I hope they don't mind me telling the story, but I have to because it illustrates the point. I went to a Nigerian non-Igbo friend, and I said, hey, um, yeah, you're from, you grew up in Nigeria. Oh, yeah, I grew up in Nigeria. So what ethnicity are you? You mentioned one of the non-Igbo ethnicities. So I said, oh, what can you tell me about the Igbo? Without skipping a beat, the first thing out of that person's mouth was, "Oh, money grubbing. They control everything. They control Nollywood, which is the film industry. They control the banks. They control this." And I'm just like, my jaw hit the floor. So I'm like, okay, so I have to look into this more. And then when you start getting into society and you start walking around with amongst Igbo people, amongst other Nigerians, the idea that the Igbo have this Jewish identity is not a secret. Everybody knows it there. It's something which is palpable on the streets. You can't go anywhere without seeing a Magen David, without people talking about our ancestors came from Israel. This is something which is just common knowledge.
I just I'm trying to like digest all of the things that you have told us. Obviously there's a lot to be done, and this is like such an introductory thing, and I feel like this similar, obviously not exactly the same story, but like a very similar kind of thing probably applies to lots of other global Jewish communities as well. who also don't have right of return. And so, yeah, so I want to get back to it if you feel comfortable to talk about it, is kind of like, is there work being done to help the Igbo get out of Nigeria? Ideally, I would say, like, let's bring them all to Israel. That's kind of what I think Israel's for, but I don't control the government. And yeah, like, is there work being done with this? Is there things that everyday people can do? I mean, obviously, educating ourselves is like number one, because people don't even know it exists or that any of this happened. But yeah, anything that you recommend for the average lay person.
Yeah, for sure. So first thing, we also have to understand that we talk about solutions to anti-Semitism, right? Our generation has the incredible privilege of having the state of Israel, right? So whereas our grandparents, our great grandparents, for them, if you were experiencing a pogrom in the Pale of Settlement in Eastern Europe or in Ethiopia or in Iraq, you know, you got to figure out another random place to go. You got to just pack up and go somewhere else. You didn't have Israel to go to.
Mm-hmm.
And even at the turn of the 19th century, there was a big debate within the Ashkenazic Jewish world. How do we respond to the rise of anti-Semitism? Now, we have benefited from the revolution that was Zionism, this idea that Jews can return to their indigenous homeland, create a society there, will be a safe haven for world Jewry. But there was also another group called the Bundists. And the
Mm-hmm.
Bundists, they had this idea called, in Yiddish, Doakite, right? This kind of
Mm-hmm.
here-ness. And they're like, no, we need to stay here in our various European countries and fight for our rights as equal citizens. So if you speak to Igbo today, and this often will kind of coincide with the way they identify ethnically and religiously, many of them will say, no, we need to fight for our equal rights and be part of Nigeria. Others will say, no, we need to fight again for our independent state where we
Mm-hmm.
live,
Right.
because they're still connected to this leave.
Of
They've
course.
been just like Jews, you tell Jews that you have to leave Europe, and they're like, look, we've contributed a lot to European civilization. You know, you say to Jews that were in the Arab world, we contribute a lot to Arab civilization. Why do we have to leave? And so you hear that from a lot of Igbos today. That being said, of course, just as there were Jews throughout all of history who were taking active steps to try and return to Zion, right, there are also Igbos that are doing the same thing. And I do have to mention, like, very briefly, that there are Igbos in Israel. There are Igbos in Israel today,
Oh,
a very small community, not because they were given the right through the law of return to get citizenship, but basically through various circumstances, have served in the military, have, go to school here, work here, but they're a small kind of vanguard compared to basically the people that do want to be able to come to Israel. And in terms of practical solutions, it's complicated because Israel's a small country and there are
right.
millions of Igbo. So what we have to deal with, first of all, is recognize reality, right? We have to recognize reality. We have to confront the Nigerian government and keep them basically honest about what they're doing and what their responsibilities are to their Jewish minorities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because even if we can't, right? Because Israel's a state just like any other state. We have our economic needs, we have our security needs. If we wouldn't be able to absorb all of American Jewry, in
Right.
a year, the country would probably collapse, right? We couldn't do that. We would have to do it in a well thought out and strategic way, but a way that still recognizes people's basic rights as Jews. So
Right.
we can be creative. We can figure out solutions to be able to also hold the Nigerian government accountable and also give Igbo Jews their right to be a part of this society in this country, just like Jews from any other part of the world.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I think that's, yeah, I mean, that's such an interesting conversation, also in the fact that, like, okay, we're thankful that Israel exists, and if we do need it, it's there for us. But also, like, Jews shouldn't have to, from all over the world, obviously in Nigeria, but also literally anywhere else, including the United States or anywhere, like, we shouldn't need to go to Israel because we're gonna literally not be able to be alive in the countries that we're in. Um, and that's just a whole other conversation about global anti-Semitism,
Right.
um, and everyone else's kind of responsibility in addressing hate of all kinds. But that is another live stream that we can do another time.
Exactly.
Um, I don't want to take up too much of your time and everyone else's. I also think that we gave everyone quite a bit to digest and understand. Um, is there anything you want to just add or say to anyone before we go? Um,
Yeah, look, a lot of people are reaching out and saying like, how can we help? And
yeah,
that's like such
yeah,
a big question, because number one, this is like on the realm of international politics, right? It
right,
comes into economic relations between the state of Israel and the Nigerian state, the United States' role in the region of West Africa, the conflict between the Islamic world and Israel, right? There's so many things that are here, right, as a part of this equation. Um, and the powers that be right now are very comfortable with us not rocking the boat, right? Because they don't mind, bringing planes full of people from Ukraine that don't even have a Jewish identity, but there's Jews in Nigeria that are basically fighting for their lives and nothing on the news, right?
yeah, right.
So at the very least, we can lift up our voices. We can do what you're doing, and thank you so much for giving me this platform to do this with you. We need to start having these conversations, talking to each other about this. Talk to your rabbi, talk to your mom, talk to your grandma, talk in the
Right.
streets about Igbo Jews, because
Yeah.
we need to start having these conversations. The second we do that, we're already changing the dynamic. The second thing, and this is something that, guys, stay tuned because it's going to be coming soon. We want to do a book drive for Igbo Jewry. We're going to be fundraising to send them something which is going to be an incredible show of solidarity to Igbo Jewry. Thank God the economic situation in Nigeria is way better than most of the African
Right.
continent. Igbo Jewry is one of the most successful groups in the entire region. But what they don't have there is an access to Judaica, right? They don't have an access
Okay.
to the books that we have. So we're going to have a fundraiser where we're going to take the money, we're going to buy the books that they ask for, that they want, and
Yes.
we're going to send them. And that's going to be a statement not only to them, it's going to be a statement to us and to our governments that they are a part of us, they are our family, and we are not going to stay silent while they are suffering.
I love it. And whenever this fundraiser is happening, obviously let me know, share it. I'm sure everyone here would also love to contribute and share. Um, wow, Yirmiyahu, I am overwhelmed in a very good way with all of the information that you just gave us. And I'm so thankful for all of your knowledge and your willingness to share and educate and keep educating. And obviously, I'm going to keep talking about the Igbo Jews and lots of other Jewish communities that are kind of in similar places. And I think that a lot of people here today learned so much that they really just had no idea about, and will take that and think about it a lot. So thank you very much for this time, and yeah, I'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you for having me. This was amazing. Let's do this again.
Yeah, for sure. All right.